Roger Baillon spent most of his life surrounded by trucks, engines, and transport routes across western France. But his real passion had nothing to do with business. During the 1950s, while running a successful transport company, he became obsessed with collecting rare automobiles from what he believed was the greatest era of car design. Roger wasn't interested in ordinary vehicles or the newest models coming out of factories. He searched for elegant pre-war and post-war machines built by legendary manufacturers like Bugatti, Talbot Lago, Maserati, and Hispano Suiza. To him, these cars were rolling sculptures. He dreamed of opening a museum where people could admire what he considered the artistic peak of French and European engineering. Over the years, Roger's property slowly filled with rare vehicles. Some sat in garages, others inside barns, and many were tucked away beneath sheets, tools, and spare parts waiting for restoration. At one point, the collection reportedly contained more than 100 cars. Roger constantly searched for unusual models, often buying vehicles long before the collector market exploded in value. During the 1960s and early 1970s, most people simply saw old luxury cars as outdated machines taking up space. Roger saw history, but in the mid-1970s, everything changed. Roger's transport business ran into severe financial trouble, and the debts became impossible to ignore. He was eventually forced to sell a large portion of the collection just to stay afloat. Around 50 cars disappeared through sales and auctions, and to the outside world, it looked like the famous Baillon collection had completely collapsed. Most people assumed the remaining vehicles had also been sold off over time. What nobody realized was that Roger secretly kept around 60 of his favorite cars hidden across the property. Instead of restoring them, he parked them inside basic wooden sheds. These were not secure garages built for preservation. Rain leaked through damaged roofs, dirt covered the floors, and plants slowly crept through broken openings in the walls. Roger still hoped he would one day recover financially and bring the collection back to life, but that moment never came. As the years passed, the cars remained untouched. Dust thickened over every surface. Rust spread across chrome and paint, and nature slowly reclaimed vehicles that had once represented the absolute height of automotive luxury. Roger eventually passed away in the early 2000s, leaving the property to his son Jacques. Unlike his father, Jacques had little interest in classic automobiles and mostly left the estate alone. The hidden sheds stayed closed for years. Neighbors nearby reportedly had no idea that some of the rarest cars in the world were quietly decaying behind those old barn walls. Time kept moving, but inside the sheds, everything remained frozen somewhere between abandonment and preservation. When Jacques died in 2014, Roger's grandchildren inherited the property and decided to investigate whether the forgotten vehicles were worth anything at all. They contacted automobile specialists Mathieu Lamour and Pierre Novikov to inspect the estate. The experts arrived expecting to find old scrap and neglected restoration projects. Instead, they stepped into what looked like an automotive graveyard from another century. The conditions were shocking. Cars sat buried beneath decades of dust. Newspapers, books, and debris. Some had flat tires that had sunk into the ground. Others were covered in bird droppings and surrounded by thick vegetation. At first glance, many of the vehicles looked completely destroyed. But as the experts moved deeper into the sheds, they started recognizing shapes and badges that should not have been there. One discovery after another appeared beneath the clutter. They uncovered rare racing models, luxury touring cars, and historic European automobiles that collectors had been searching for over decades. Among them was a rare Maserati A6G 2000, one of only a handful ever produced. But the biggest discovery was still hidden beneath piles of old magazines and papers in the corner of one shed. As they carefully cleared the debris away, the unmistakable lines of a Ferrari 250 GTS-WB California Spider slowly appeared. Even in terrible condition, the car stood out immediately. The California Spider was already considered one of the most beautiful and valuable Ferraris ever built. Collectors around the world knew about the model, But this particular example had effectively vanished from history for nearly 50 years. When the chassis numbers were checked, the discovery became even more unbelievable. The Ferrari had once belonged to Alain Delon, one of France's most famous actors during the 1960s. Reports connected the car to glamorous drives along the French Riviera with stars like Jane Fonda and Shirley MacLaine. Historians had known the Ferrari existed, but nobody had any idea where it had gone. All that time, it had simply been sitting inside a leaking rural shed covered by forgotten magazines. News of the discovery spread rapidly through the collector world. Photographs of the dusty cars stunned enthusiasts because the collection looked almost unreal. Instead of shiny showroom vehicles, these were priceless machines preserved exactly as time had left them. In 2015, the Baillon collection was sent to auction in Paris. What began decades earlier as one man's obsession suddenly became one of the most famous barn finds ever discovered. The lost Ferrari alone sold for around $18.5 million despite its condition. Altogether, the collection brought in more than $28 million. Today, the story of the Baillon collection is remembered as one of the greatest lost treasure discoveries in automotive history. The cars sat quietly behind old barn doors for decades, slowly disappearing beneath dust, rust, and time, while the world outside forgot they even existed.